I'm Laura Brown, and I'm with the Tennessee Commission on Aging and Disability. I'm the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman, and it's my distinct honor to welcome our next speaker, Samantha Hutson. Ms. Hutson is an instructor of food, nutrition, and dietetics at Tennessee Technological University in the College of Agriculture and Human Ecology. She has held this position for 2 years with previous experience as a clinical dietitian at Summit View Health Management. She received her Bachelor of Science degree from TTU and her Master's in Clinical Nutrition from East Tennessee State University. With no further ado, let's welcome Samantha Hutson.
All right, well, I would like to say that I'm very thankful to be here today. This is obviously a topic that I love to talk about. Can you all hear me? Okay. This is obviously a topic that I love to talk about, especially something like this where we're talking about just the basics of a healthy diet. My idea of nutrition is that it's something that everyone can do. It's something that you don't have to really step too far outside of your comfort zone to be successful with. So in my mind, my favorite quote when you're talking about nutrition is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so that's kind of the way that I approach things, still with a laid-back attitude. I try to anyway. I have a few things that I thought would be interesting for you all to hear about, and I hope that that is the case. And when thinking about how to structure this program, I was thinking about what are the typical questions that I tend to get asked over and over and over again. And so that kind of clues me in to what people are interested in, kind of those hot topics that are going on out there, those things that Dr. Oz talks about. Those are often the things that I get questions about. So that's the structure of what we're going to talk about today. The first thing that I want to do, though, is I'm going to immediately go away from these slides, and I'm going to take you all to a different website, different set of PowerPoints, and just kind of introduce this topic with a little portion distortion game, just to let us start thinking about how some things have changed over the years. A little bit of technical things here. Okay, so this is a PowerPoint slide that I use in my classes sometimes when I'm teaching because I feel like it's a good introduction to just some basics on calories, basics on how much exercise do you really have to do to burn those extra calories that you take in, and then that'll bring us to how those calories can add up over time and impact your health. So it's a portion distortion game, and it's really focused on how much have things changed over the last 20 years in terms of what we're given for our portion sizes. Okay, so 20 years ago, the average bagel was 3-inch diameter, okay, and it was about 140 calories, which is pretty reasonable, okay. Today, the average bagel is how many calories do you all think? I heard too many, and I heard 300, so lots of different answers there. Let's take a look. Okay, so it's about twice as big, and 350 calories. So then the other thing that this talks a little bit about is that calorie difference. So the question then is, how long would you have to rake leaves in order to just burn those extra calories that you consumed from that bagel? So extra 50 minutes of raking leaves, and that's just from one small thing that you've had that day. You know, if that's something that is throughout the day, you're being presented with those extra portion sizes. How many calories would you think are in today's cheeseburger? 750. That's very specific. I like that. 1,100. Got a pretty good variety on this one. Let's see. So there's 590, okay, 590 calories, which doesn't sound like maybe a whole lot, but when you think about the fries that you have with it and the drink that you have with it with the calories, you're looking at over 1,000 calories for one meal, which those things do add up. So the calorie difference there is 257. And the question that they ask is, how long will you have to lift weights? Okay, lift weights in order to burn those extra 257 calories. An hour? Hour and a half? Okay, let's see. Hour and a half. If you lift weights for an hour and 30 minutes, okay, again, you're going to have some difficulty getting out of bed the next day if you're lifting weights for an hour and 30 minutes, but that will burn that extra 257 calories. Okay, let's do one more, and then I'll kind of sum all this up and we'll move on. Okay, this is your spaghetti and meatballs. 20 years ago, your meal was about 500 calories. So that's 1 cup of spaghetti with sauce and 3 small meatballs. Today's portion is a little bit larger. Okay, we're thinking about more like the Olive Garden portion that you get, which is a little bit bigger. How many calories do you think are in today's portion of spaghetti? 700? 1100? Okay, you all have a number in your head, I'm sure. Okay, so we have about 1100, 1025 calories, and it's pretty much double compared to what the portion size was 20 years ago. So that's a calorie difference of 525 calories, or pretty much an extra meal's worth of calories that you've consumed. How long would you have to clean your house to burn 525 calories? All afternoon, 3 hours. Okay, couple of weeks worth of house cleaning there. Okay, let's take a look. It is a little bit different depending on a person's body weight. A person with a larger body weight tends to have to do less activity to burn the same amount of calories. Okay, so if a person who, for example, 2 people go and they ride a bike for an hour, one person weighs 150 pounds, one person weighs 200 pounds. The person who weighs 200 pounds will probably have burned more calories in that same amount of time because of the extra energy it takes to do these tasks, okay, to propel that extra weight along. So that is an excellent point. This is based on a 130-pound person, so it would vary depending on what your weight is. But for that 130-pound person, it's 2 hours and 35 minutes of cleaning your house, which is probably more what I do through the whole week as opposed to one day. So the point of all of this is just to help you guys see that those little choices that you make, or those things that you think are little choices throughout the day, can really add up, and it really takes more time to burn those calories than maybe we feel like. Okay, maybe I feel like when I talk to people, sometimes we have a little bit of a distorted view of how much exercise we truly have to do to burn those extra calories that we take in. So it's just those little choices throughout the day that really add up. So let's jump back into our other slides here. Okay, and any time along the way, please feel free to stop me, ask questions, make comments. Yes?
I want to know about walking.
Uh-huh.
How many calories walking? Just walking, not speed walking. Do you have a number for that?
Yeah, if you're going to burn about, again, it depends on weight. Walking, you're going to burn a little bit less because it's not quite as strenuous. Just as a rough estimate, I would say that you would burn at maybe a 15-minute mile, you would burn maybe 100 calories to 150 calories for that 1 mile. That is pretty fast. Yeah, 15-minute mile is pretty fast. And then the slower that you go with that, you're going to burn a little bit less. Okay, the more vigorous your activity is, the less time that you have to exercise to burn the same amount of calories. But just a kind of a rough estimate, and of course that is different depending on your particular body size. Anything else before we jump into it? Okay, the first little bit is just talking a little bit about the importance of nutrition, which I think at this point we all realize that nutrition is important. There are lots of things, when I'm talking about health, when I'm thinking about wellness issues, I'm not really just focused in on diet. There are lots of things that go into it. You know, the keynote speaker, he mentioned stress and sleep and all of those types of things, and all of it, looking at the big picture, all of those things are important. But with my background, of course, I'm going to talk a little bit more about diet and exercise and body weight than anything else. When you look at those top 5 leading causes of death, or 5 of the 10 leading causes of death, we know that heart disease is number 1. We see of these 5, we can make a direct connection between what we eat and those particular causes of death or mortality. Probably the one that we focus on the most is heart disease because it is up there at the number 1 on the list. One thing I would like to point out is with all of the new research that we're seeing over the past however many years, if you look at those indirect causes of death, you would see tobacco use at the top of the list because we know how tobacco use impacts cancer, heart disease, those causes of death. But what we're starting to see now in the research, we're starting to see physical inactivity and inadequate diet. They think over the next few years, that's actually going to take over as that number 1 leading indirect cause of death or mortality. So I think that just goes back to that prevention is key and why we need to focus on how important nutrition is. Okay. So the way that I've structured this is I just want to talk a little bit about maybe some of those things that you guys have heard, and then come back with the next slide and talk about what the facts say, what the research says, what you guys really need to know. A lot of this you guys are probably familiar with, but there may be a little question in your mind because there is a lot of misinformation out there when it comes to diet. There's a lot of places that you can access information about diet, but they may not all be accurate, okay, or reliable. Okay, so the first myth that I want to talk a little bit about, grain products such as bread, pasta, and rice are fattening, and I should avoid them when I'm trying to lose weight. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. Okay, so the facts are, I think the reason that this myth came along is because of all the low-carb diets that we've been seeing. Okay, kind of that influx of carbohydrates are bad. But what we know is that carbohydrates need to really provide us with the majority of calories that we consume. Okay, we need carbohydrates really for energy to our brains. It's one of the only ways we can get energy to our brains. If you guys have ever tried a low-carb diet, I may be stepping out on a limb here, but the thing that I often hear with that is that I tried the low-carb diet, I lost a lot of weight initially, eventually over time you gain it back because it's not sustainable, because everybody wants to have some carbohydrates in their lives, and then they're really tired, okay? And that's because we need the majority of our calories from carbohydrates. And so our recommendations are just to focus on the type of carbohydrate that you consume. So you want to focus on whole grains. You want to look on the food label for the whole grain label. Now, if you see something like stone ground or whole wheat, that may not necessarily mean that it is a whole grain product. Okay, so what you're looking for is on the ingredients list, that first ingredient should say whole grain. Okay, so you're turning it over, looking at that ingredients list. We're not going by color and not just going by what's on the front of that package. But there are lots of good things that we get from carbohydrates. Okay, we get lots of fiber. Okay, fiber is good for gut health, it's good for heart health, good for lots of things. We also get lots of B vitamins. Okay, B vitamins, if you have enough B vitamins, that helps promote energy as well, energy metabolism. So that's a good thing. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about what is a serving of grains, because what they say is that you need a certain amount of ounces of grains per day. So what does that mean? What is an ounce of grain? Okay, so what I always remember, what always helps me to keep this straight, is that if you need 6 to 7 ounces of grains per day, 1 ounce is roughly equivalent to a slice of bread. Okay, and so if I can remember that, then I can keep in mind if we need about somewhere between 6 to 8 ounces of grains per day. So if we can keep in mind that 1 slice of bread is equivalent to 1 ounce of grains, then that can help you kind of keep track, okay? And one really good reference, if you all are online, if you're looking at things, looking things up online, I would suggest you guys go to choosemyplate.gov, choosemyplate.gov. There's so much good information on that website. And it'll come back and talk about this just a little bit more, okay? Gluten, is that the question? I have that one on here. I knew that was going to be a question. And we can go ahead and talk about that one. Let me skip ahead just a little bit. We'll make our way back. I'm going to come back to it. Okay, so here's our myth. Anyone can benefit from a gluten-free diet. That's something that we hear about on the news. We're seeing all of the gluten-free products in the grocery store. We've heard that it can give you more energy. I've had the question, can it be used to treat autism? Okay, so I'm going to talk about all of those things just a little bit. So really what it boils down to is it is necessary for some people to go gluten-free. Specifically, those who have been diagnosed with celiac disease. Okay? If you have been diagnosed with celiac disease, the only treatment is to eliminate gluten from your diet forever. Okay? Forever, it's eliminated from your diet. This can be diagnosed with a blood test or with a biopsy of the intestines. Otherwise, there's not really a benefit to going gluten-free based on the research in terms of weight loss, in terms of improved overall health. There's not a real benefit, okay? Now there's something else that I want to talk a little bit about, and that's gluten intolerance, okay? If you consume foods that contain gluten, which the main thing would be any food that contains wheat, okay? Wheat, barley, and rye, those all contain gluten. And then oats don't contain it, but they may be processed in a facility that also processes foods that contain gluten. And so you want to look on oats for that gluten-free label just to be sure that it wasn't, okay, if that is something you're concerned with. Now, gluten intolerance is something that they don't really have any kind of biological test that they can test, run some kind of test and say, okay, you're gluten intolerant, let's try to avoid it. So really, the only way that you can diagnose this is if you eliminate gluten from your diet for at least 2 to 3 weeks and see if you feel better, okay? It's not recommended that you self-diagnose either gluten intolerance or celiac disease because it is a pretty strict diet. If any of you guys have ever tried to follow a gluten-free diet, there are lots of things that have to be removed. If you think about wheat, you think about all the different foods that wheat is present in, there are lots of things that would have to be excluded. So lots of grain products, of course, but then also it's present in maybe a prepackaged gravy. It's present in lots of condiments. It's present in cakes and cookies that you would purchase. So lots of things that maybe we don't think about. Now, lots of people say, well, I did a gluten-free diet and I felt so much better. I had so much more energy. So I feel like it was the gluten that I had a problem with. Well, that may be the case, but sometimes I think it's because you eliminate a lot of processed foods when you go gluten-free. Okay, and when you eliminate those processed foods, you're eating foods in their more natural state. You're eating more fruits, more vegetables, more lean cuts of meat. You're probably doing some type of whole grain bread replacement for the wheat bread. So people probably lose a little bit of weight because of that. They have a little bit more energy because of that. So I think it's not necessarily the gluten-free, but the types of foods that you begin to eat. And that is my opinion. And there's just not a lot of research yet. They're still in the process of doing research on this. That's why they don't have a test that they can do to test for gluten intolerance. But if you do feel like that's an issue, I would just recommend that you see your doctor and talk to them about that. Let them know what your symptoms are. Maybe write down what you're eating and how you feel after you eat that particular food, and help them make that connection with you. Okay? Yes? There are benefits to eating foods that contain gluten. Okay, so if you eliminate gluten, you're eliminating a lot of grain products. And when you do that, you're probably going to have a diet that's lower in fiber, lower in iron, lower in B vitamins. And so really it's not the benefit of the gluten, it's the benefit of the food, the grain products that contain gluten. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions? Yes? You're not going to be hurting. If you can make sure that you're still following a balanced diet, that you've not eliminated that grains group, you're still going to be okay. It's completely possible to follow a gluten-free balanced diet. It's just if you don't have the diagnosis, the official language from the organizations that do the research is that there's no benefit to following the diet if you don't have the diagnosis. But it's 100% possible to follow a healthy, balanced diet going gluten-free. Yeah. Anything else on that? That is a big topic. That's been something that's been building steam for a few years now. I'm going to go backwards just a little bit. Just giving you a little preview here of what we're going to talk about. We have about 20 minutes. Okay, another topic that I often have questions about or get questions about is physical activity only counts if I can do it for long periods of time. Most of us don't really have long periods of time during the day that we can designate this is when I'm going to exercise, and that's okay. What the research says is you don't necessarily have to exercise for those recommended, excessively long periods of time to still get benefits from physical activity. Okay? So the recommendation is that we get, for weight maintenance, about 150 minutes of exercise per week. They like to put it in those really confusing terms. So what that means is about 25 to 30 minutes of exercise per day. Okay, that's what we need to maintain weight. If your goal is weight loss, or if your goal is to maintain weight loss, that number goes up by 100 minutes per week. Okay, so if you're in weight maintenance phase, or if you're trying to lose weight, it's more like 250 minutes per week, 45 minutes per day to an hour per day of exercise. Okay, But that sounds like a lot right there together. But what they're saying is that as long as you can find 10 minutes in your day to do some type of physical activity, maybe you do 10 minutes 3 times a day, or you do 10 minutes twice a day one day, and 10 minutes 4 times a day the next day. It's all about balance and whatever works for you. Okay, so as long as you can find that 10-minute period to devote to increasing your heart rate and doing a little bit of physical activity, you're still going to get that benefit. And then you've probably all heard those basic tips. You know, it doesn't have to be that you put on workout clothes and that you're, in the mindset of this is my exercise time. It might be that when you go grocery shopping, you take 10 minutes out of that time to make 3 laps around Walmart. That's 10 minutes. And that's not taking that much extra time out of your day. It's just finding those opportunities to make that fit in, okay? And do things that you like, okay? That's probably the biggest tip that I can offer in terms of diet and physical activity, okay? The things that work for me, if you told me that I had to go run a mile as my exercise, I would never do that, okay? But if you tell me that I can ride a bike for 10 miles, I'll go do that every day, So everybody is different, okay? Don't expect for the whatever worked for your friend to work for you. That's okay if it doesn't, okay? Just find something that works for you and go with that, okay? Whether it's your food or whether it's your physical activity, okay? Let go of all that guilt that we have associated with food and with exercise, okay? Because that's just going to hinder you. That's not going to help. Okay, another myth that I've heard, or another question that I get asked, okay, is going vegetarian will help me lose weight and be healthier. And now this one is probably a little bit tricky because it's not necessarily a myth, okay, but it's not necessarily always correct, if that makes sense. So research does show that people who follow a vegetarian diet, on average, they eat fewer calories, they eat less fat, okay, which makes sense because they've eliminated meat, poultry, fish, maybe eggs, dairy products. They may have lower levels of obesity, lower blood pressure, reduced risk of heart disease because of that, lower BMI, but I think the important thing to keep in mind here is just the sheer act of eliminating meat, poultry, fish from your diet doesn't necessarily guarantee those things. It's entirely possible to still include high calorie, maybe high sugar foods, which thereby increase your overall calories, which increases your weight, which increases your risk for heart disease, which could increase your blood pressure. So it's all about the type of food that you consume, okay, whether you're following a vegetarian diet or not. And then something to keep in mind, if you do eliminate all animal products, if you eliminate dairy products, you have to think about the nutrients that we get from those particular foods and think about how to replace those. So if this is something you're thinking about, and I could talk about this for a long time, but if this is something that you have more questions about or that you've thought about, if you go to choosemyplate.gov, that site I mentioned earlier, there is a section called Tips for Vegetarians, okay, and it goes through all of the basics. It goes through if you are eliminating dairy products, here are some things that you need to include in your diet to make sure that you're not deficient in calcium and vitamin D. So it goes through some of those things that you need to know. Okay, and that brings us to dairy products are fattening and they're unhealthy. Anybody heard this one before? Had this question? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. Okay, it's the types of things that you're choosing, okay? So I would encourage you to move toward the fat-free and the low-fat products, okay? And a lot of people say, and I completely understand, because I can taste a difference between 2% milk or whole milk and fat-free or skim milk. So I understand that concern. If you're trying to make that transition, I would suggest that you maybe mix half and half, the 2% and the skim milk, and maybe slowly make that transition over, and then it may not be as painful. But they are just as healthy, the low-fat products, and they're lower in fat and calories. So when they take that fat away, the only thing they're removing from the whole milk is fat. When they take that fat away, they are taking away some of those fat-soluble vitamins that are contained within it. But they add those back. Anything they take away, they add it back to those fat-free products. So you're getting just as healthy of a product. The only thing you're taking away is the fat and those extra calories from the fat. Okay? And it's always good to include those. The government guidelines suggest for men and women that you all include about 3 cups a day of dairy products. So that's really easy to think about in terms of milk, in terms of yogurt, but there is a little bit of confusion, I think, when it comes to the cheese. So they say that 1.5 ounces of natural cheese serves as 1 serving or 1 cup in terms of what it provides you, the nutrients that it provides. So I brought a little food model, and this is 1 ounce. Okay, so 1.5 of these would serve as 1 serving. Okay, and then for the processed cheese, it's 2 ounces. Okay, you have to consume a little bit more of that to get that same nutritional value. Okay, but for milk, it's just the 8 ounces, and for yogurt, it's the same way, just the 8 ounces for a serving. It would be the same. Yeah, those are pretty interchangeable. The soy milk, the almond milk, rice milk, going to be fairly similar in terms of the nutrients that you get from those. Okay. Anybody heard anything about the raw milk? Okay. It's good? I've heard that, and I've had that question about, what is the benefit of drinking raw milk? So one of the things that I wanted to point out is just the CDC or FDA recommendation is just to be careful. If raw milk is just milk that hasn't been pasteurized, so you just want to be careful about drinking it. They have seen with that raw milk trend the incidence of foodborne illness related to drinking milk increase. And they say it shouldn't make me laugh, but it made me laugh a little bit because they said that there was a 300% increase over the last 7 years, but that was only like 7 people compared to not a lot of people before. Okay, but they are seeing an increase, so that's the public service announcement of the day. Okay, anybody heard this one? Sugar causes diabetes. Okay, now this one is a little tricky too. What they say is that sugar intake will not directly cause you to develop diabetes. However, if you are consuming more sugar, you are probably consuming more calories, which is going to increase your weight, which makes you more resistant to the action of insulin, which can lead to that diagnosis of diabetes. Okay, so it's not necessarily sugar, but it's an overall intake in calories, is what the American Diabetes Association says. Now, I found it interesting in the research, there was a connection between, not a causal connection, but a connection between drinking sugary drinks and the development of diabetes. So they are recommending that we cut back on our intake of sugary drinks. So with all of that information that we're given, it's a little difficult to navigate. What is the cause versus is there just a connection? But they still say that it's just the increase in calories from those drinks that can lead to the development of diabetes. Okay, and if you have a 12-ounce soda, okay, so just a 12-ounce regular soda, you are getting about, well, you guys can guess. How many teaspoons of sugar do you think are in a 12-ounce soda? 4, 3, 6, 12. Okay, there are 10. Okay, 10 teaspoons of sugar in just a regular soda. And compare that to the American Heart Association recommendation that men, I believe for men, it's 9 teaspoons per day. And for women, it's about 7 teaspoons per day. So 1 12-ounce of soda, and you've exceeded those American Heart Association recommendations. Okay, and that adds up so quickly. Okay, so there's that connection. But the main risk factors for type 2 diabetes, a diet high in calories, being overweight, and an inactive lifestyle. Now, I would like to back this up or preface this by saying there's a huge genetic component. Okay, so all I'm talking about here are the things that we can modify. Okay, when you're talking about modifiable, that's my area. Okay, when you're talking about things you can't change, that's your age, that's your family history, that's perhaps your gender. Okay, so we're working against those things sometimes and just doing the things that we can change. Okay? Yes?
When they talk about sugar, are they talking about sweeteners or just sugar particularly?
They are, that is,
You could have corn syrup,
that is an excellent question.
types of honey.
Yes. When you consume any type of sugar, whether it's honey, whether it's table sugar, any type of sugar that has calories. Are you talking about the non-nutritive sweeteners or any? Yes.
Sugar is different.
Yes. Any kind. Both. Any kind of sweetener, any kind of sugar. When we consume those, whether it's the molasses or whether it's honey or whether it's the agave nectar or the high fructose corn syrup. Actually, I have a slide on that too. You guys are just a step ahead all the way through. Your body recognizes all of those the same way. Okay, there's really not a nutritive benefit to sweetening things with anything besides sugar. Okay, it's all kind of broken down and processed the same way. The reason that they use the high fructose corn syrup is you get more bang for your buck. Okay, you can use a very small amount of the high fructose corn syrup and really sweeten foods. So they can use a lower amount of sweetener for those processed foods. And that's why we see it in a lot of the sodas and the soft drinks and things like that. But when we consume those, it's not that those things are better or worse for you, because I've had people ask, is honey better? Because it seems like it would be, because it's more natural, food in its more natural state. But really, when your body breaks those things down, it doesn't recognize a difference. It doesn't affect your blood sugar any differently. It doesn't affect your health any differently. It's not less calories. It's all similar in calorie content. Does that answer your question? Is that okay? Yes. Your body is going to break those down similarly also. While I wouldn't recommend to exclude those from a diet if you're trying to monitor your blood sugar, and this would be a question for your doctor or dietitian also that you're working with, but yeah, when you consume those, your body's going to break those down. Starch, sugar, no matter what it is, broken down affect blood sugar in a similar way. The one benefit, though, is that those foods contain fiber also, like a whole fruit contains fiber, which when we consume sugar like this, your blood sugar spikes, okay, and then drops, and you tend to feel bad. When you consume a whole fruit, your blood sugar level is a little more level, okay? The fiber helps to slow that spike. And so it tends to react just a little bit differently just because of that fiber that's also in that food. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
What about stevia products?
Going to be the same. Yeah. And all of that is just a little bit confusing because they're not really forthcoming with that, with how it affects your blood sugar. The way that they market it, the way they market honey is that it's natural. Yeah, but it's the same as fruit. You know, the fruit is natural too, but it's still going to affect your blood sugar the same way. Yeah, the only time you can avoid that is if you use those non-nutritive sweeteners. You can avoid that spike. Okay. Well, there's, in my opinion, based on the research, there's not a lot of research to say that they are bad for you. However, there are individual case studies that would maybe say otherwise. You know, you can talk to people who say, I consume a diet drink and my joints hurt. Okay? And I think I've heard enough of that to be a little bit cautious. But then based on like government guidelines, research that's out there, they say that those things are safe until you get to a really, really, really excessive amount. So you would have to drink 60 diet drinks before they will concede that at that point, 60 diet drinks in a day, before they'll really say, that's probably too much of that sweetener, which I would agree. But otherwise, there's just not a lot of research that says that it's bad. So I don't want to represent them poorly. Really, I think aspartame is the one that I would be most cautious of based on what I've seen. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, those are things, you'll see them packaged different ways, but it's the Equal and the Splenda, what are some others? Stevia, yeah. Sweet and Low, yeah, the little packets that you see. So typically sugar provides 4 calories per gram, okay, of what you consume, 4 calories per gram, whereas the non-nutritive sweeteners only provide just a minimal amount of calories. Okay. Any other questions on this? I think my time is just about up. That is my viewpoint. I prefer natural foods in moderation. Everything in moderation. So if you really enjoy chocolate cake, that's okay. I've got one that really enjoys chocolate cake. If you really enjoy chocolate cake, that's an every now and then food. When I talk to kids, and it applies to my own life too, I do the go slow and whoa foods. Okay, so a go food would be like fruits and vegetables and the low-fat dairy and yogurt and those types of healthy foods, whole grains. And then you have the slow foods, and that might be, let's see, every now and then you have a steak. Okay, you really like steak, but that's a slow food. That's only every now and then. And then a whoa food would be like the drinks that you don't really get any nutritional value from them. Okay, and if just following that kind of guideline, I feel like can be helpful, and it's not as limiting. Okay, you can't stick with anything that's very limiting. You're going to be miserable, you're going to hate it, and you're not going to do it. You're going to feel guilty, and that leads to that kind of sad cycle of dieting. Okay, so just stick with those things you can do. Yes, sir. Go foods. Yep. Go slow and whoa. So if you can kind of categorize those foods and make most of your foods be go foods, a couple of times a week, a couple of times a day, you have some slow foods. And then whoa foods are things that are on special occasions. Okay, that birthday cake on your birthday. Okay, my time is up. I have more that I could talk about. I could talk about it all day. I would be happy to, I'll be around for a little bit, be happy to answer any questions that you all have. I appreciate your time, and I really appreciate your questions too. Okay, thank you.